No, he said patiently. I said I was not proposing marriage to you. I am still not. There is no need unless you pass. If you do, then yes, you will be my wife 6 months of the year. I fidgeted. What if I don't want to be your wife? He stilled, his smile disappearing. Then it would be a simple enough thing for you to purposefully fail. The hollowness in his voice immediately made me feel guilty. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Do not apologize. His tone was still void of emotion, and it only made me feel worse. But any time I ask too much of you, then you may leave and my mother would die. I clenched my fist so hard that my nails dug into my palms, and it was several moments before I managed to come up with something to say, a peace offering, if nothing else. Maybe if I pretended that marrying him was a possibility, then he wouldn't look so empty. What about then? I said. If we get married, will I have to. No. Henry thawed slightly as he focused on me again. I was sure he could see right through me. You will be my wife in name and title only, and I would not ask of you if it were not necessary for the underworld to recognize you as its ruler, as it recognized Persephone. I do not expect you to love me, Kate. I do not dare hope that you would think of me in any way other than as a friend, and I know I must earn even that much. I understand that this is not your ideal life, and I do not wish to make it more difficult for you than it already is. My only desire is to help you pass these tests, and to stop whoever it was from killing me. I cautiously perched on the edge of my bed. There was still enough distance between us that I felt safe even though the air that separated us seemed to crackle. What about love? Don't you, want someone? Want a family? And stuff? I have a family, he said, but before I could correct myself, he continued, If you mean children, then no, I have never believed that to be in my future. But is that what you want? He smiled faintly. I have been alone for a very long time. To expect anything else in the years to come would be foolish. Despite the fact that he looked only a few years older than me, I couldn't imagine how old Henry might actually be. Wasn't sure I wanted to know, really. But how could someone live for so long and be alone? I could barely handle the few nights I'd spent home without my mother. Multiply that by eternity. I couldn't fathom it. Henry? Yes. What happens if I don't pass? He was silent for a long time, his fingers idly running across the silk lining of his robe. I will fade, he said quietly. Someone else will take over my realm, and therefore I will have no reason to exist any longer. So you die. The gravity of the situation hit me hard, and I stared off to the side, unable to look at him. It wasn't just my mother's life that was riding on my ability to pass these tests. I fade, he corrected. The living die and their souls remain in the underworld for eternity. However, my kind do not have souls. We cease to exist completely without a shred of our former selves remaining. One cannot die if one has never to live to begin with. I clenched my fist around the blanket. It was even worse than dying then. Who? He gave me a puzzled look. Who what? Who gets your job if you give it up now? Ah, he smiled sadly. My nephew. Who is he? What is his name? Is he on the council? Yes, he is on the council, said Henry, but I am afraid I cannot tell you his name. Why not? It seemed no one was willing to trust me with the truth in this place, and while I could understand Calliope not giving me the whole story, Henry knew. Henry should have told me. He cleared his throat and at least had the decency to look me in the eye, because I fear it would upset you and you are unhappy enough as it is. I do not wish to make it any worse. I fell silent as I tried to think of who it could possibly be that would upset me. No one came to mind. I don't understand. You will. There was nothing I could say to that, and he must have known it, because instead of looking at me unexpectedly, he returned to his book. I watched him, searching for any sign that he wasn't human. The angles of his face were too symmetrical to be normal, his smooth skin devoid of even a hint of stubble, the thick, jet black hair that hung an inch above his shoulders, and the unnerving cool of his eyes. It was his eyes that did it, swirling pools of silver that seemed to constantly be moving. In the low light they almost glowed. It wasn't until he cleared his throat that I realized I was staring. Yeah, we can unplug that then. Okay. Even though I was still annoyed that he wouldn't trust me with the truth, I wanted to break the tension, so I said the first thing that came to mind. What do you do during the day? When you're not here, I mean. Or are you always here? I'm not always here. He slid the bookmark between the pages again and set his novel aside. My brothers and sisters and I all have duties we attend to. I rule the dead, so most of the time is spent in the underworld, overseeing decisions and making sure everything runs smoothly. It's far more complicated than that, of course, but if you pass, you will learn the ins and outs of what I do. Oh, I bit my lip. What's the other world like? All in good time, he said, reaching over to briefly set his hand over mine. His palm was warm, but I fought the urge to shiver at his touch. What about you? What do you enjoy doing with your time? I shrugged. I like reading and drawing, though I'm not very good at it. Mom and I used to garden together, and she taught me how to play cards. I eyed him. Do you know how to play? I'm adequate at a few games, though I do not know if they are still popular. Maybe we could play something sometime, I said. If you're going to be in here every night, I mean. He nodded. That would be pleasant. We fell into silence again. He looked comfortable, lounging on the bed as if he'd done it 100 times before, for all I knew he had. But I didn't want to think about that. I wasn't the first, but I would be the last. Rejecting him wouldn't do either of us any good. My heart thudded loudly in protest at the thought, and since I was stuck here for 6 months, I had no intention of getting on his bad side. I was, however, exhausted. I grappled with myself for several seconds, going back and forth between what was right and what I wanted. I should have talked to him, asked him more questions, gotten to know him, but all I wanted to do was to sleep, which I would never get to do if he stayed, even if he didn't make a sound. No matter what he said about duties and expectations, that kind of anxiety wasn't going to go away overnight. Henry, I said softly. He'd gone back to reading his book, but in an instant his eyes were on me. Please don't take this wrong way, but I'm really tired. He stood, taking his book with him. Instead of looking angry or hurt, however, his expression was as neutral as always. It has been a long day for both of us. Thanks, I gave him a grateful smile, hoping that he'd smooth over any wrinkles I wasn't sensing. Of course, he walked to the door. Good night, Kate. It was such a small thing, but the hint of affection in his voice made my cheeks warm. Night, I said, hoping he couldn't see my blush from across the room. So you like him? It wasn't a question, and I glared at my grinning mother as we sat on the bench, watching joggers and people walking their dogs past. I didn't say that, I said to the slouching. Beside me, my mother sat poised as if she were dining with royalty instead of spending the morning in Central Park. I just don't want him to die, that's all. No one else should have to die because of me. No one has died because of you, she said, running her fingers through my hair and brushing it out of my eyes. Even if you don't pass, it won't be your fault. As long as you do your best, everything will be all right. But how can I do my best when I don't even know what the tests are? I shoved my hands between my knees. How am I supposed to do this? She wrapped her arm around my shoulders. Everyone believes in you except for you, Kate, she said gently. Maybe that should tell you something. Even if everyone believed in me, that didn't mean they were right, and it didn't mean I would succeed. All it meant was that on top of everything else, I had to worry about disappointing them too, or in Henry's case, forcing him into early retirement from his entire existence. But you do like him, don't you? Said my mother after several minutes passed. I craned my neck to look up at her, surprised to see real concern on her face. He's nice, I said wearily, wondering where she was going with this. I think we could be friends. Do you think he's cute? I rolled my eyes. He's a god, Mom. Of course he's cute. A wry smile spread across her face. It's about time you admitted that he's God. I shrugged and looked away. Kind of hard to pretend otherwise now, but he's nice, so I guess as long as he doesn't try to turn me into a pile of ash, I could get used to it. Good. She hugged me and gave me a kiss on the temple. I'm glad you like him. He could be good for you, and you shouldn't be alone. I sighed inwardly, not bothering to correct her. If it made her happy to think I liked Henry like that, then so be it. She deserved a little happiness before I became such a disappointment. I expected the days in Eden Manor to drag, but instead their repetition made them go by quickly. Calliope and Ella helped me get ready in the morning and always sat on the edge of the bed, talking animatedly about her latest conquest. After a few short weeks of dating the guard Sanders, she'd moved on. His name's Theo, she said, so excited that she could hardly sit still. He's gorgeous and tall and smart, and he says I have the prettiest eyes he's ever seen. In the mirror, I saw Ella's expression harden. Stay away from him, she snapped. I tried to turn around so I could see them both, but Calliope held my shoulders down, not yet finished with my hair. Why? Said Ava haughtily. Is he your boyfriend? Ella narrowed her eyes. He's my twin. I sighed. If I had to put up with this for the next 5 months, I was going to do something drastic. So, said Ava, crossing her arms, he likes me and I like him, and I don't see the problem. How Ava could look at Ella's face and not cower, I had no idea, but Ava was trying to be Ava, no matter how long Ella glared at her. If you hurt him, I will hunt you down and kill you all over again, and this time I'll make sure you won't have some pretty little afterlife to come back to, snarled Ella. I opened my mouth to tell Ella exactly what was going to happen if she even tried, but Ava cut in before I had the chance. And what if she hurts me? Then I'm sure you'd have done something to deserve it. From then on out, Ava and Ella could barely stand to be in the same room together. I couldn't blame them. Slowly, I adjusted to my new reality, and Henry was right. Once I accepted that maybe this wasn't all just some big, crazy joke, things got much easier, and I didn't constantly exhaust myself trying to rationalize the incomprehensible. While I still didn't like the idea of the guards or Calliope testing my food, a job which Ella strongly encouraged Ava to take over, pretending I was stuck in the 18th century helped me to come to terms with everything that was happening around me, with the exception of my strange relationship with Henry. As the weeks passed, the evening quickly became my favorite part of the day, aided by the fact that I didn't have to listen to Ella and Ava bicker all the time. We talked about what I'd done that day, even though when he tried to distract me, it never escaped my attention that we never talked about how his day had gone. I taught him how to play my favorite card games, and he seemed to enjoy learning, asking me polite questions and not interrupting my rambling responses. Sometimes I worked up the courage to ask him questions as well, which he would answer vaguely, if at all. He still refused to tell me what the tests were, but to his credit, he seemed eager to help me as comfortable as possible. Everything about my day was timed. Half an hour for breakfast, which was always full of my favorite foods. I didn't gain weight, and that only gave me an excuse to eat as much as I wanted. After breakfast, I had 5 hours of lessons where I studied mythology, art, theology, astronomy, anything Irene thought I needed to know. Daydreaming wasn't an option either, being her only student, and she seemed to develop a distinct lack of compassion about what I was and wasn't interested in learning. Still, there was one plus: at least calculus wasn't on the curriculum. We spent an inordinate amount of time on the Olympians, the Greek gods who ruled the universe and who could decide my fate. Most people typically think they were only 12, said Irene, but if you look carefully throughout history, there are 14. The significance of that number wasn't lost on me. 14 Olympians and 14 thrones. They would be the ones deciding my fate, and because of that, I paid extra attention to my lessons about them, as if knowing everything I would somehow give me a leg up. I learned about Zeus and Hera and their children, the children Zeus fathered with other women, as well as Athena, who sprang fully grown from his head, about Demeter and her daughter Persephone, and about the role Hades played. This was Henry, as my mother had mentioned, and it was strange to balance mythology with the knowledge that to these people it was history, that apparently Henry had really done all these things, but the more I learned, the easier it became to accept it, and once Irene was sure I knew as much as I could about the members of the council, we moved on to other myths. But the Olympians were always present in those stories too, and it did nothing to help calm my nerves. In the afternoons, I was allowed to do whatever I wanted. Sometimes I stayed inside and read or spent time with Ava, and sometimes I went outside and explored the grounds. Past the edge of the elaborate garden was a forest that grew wild, and it extended through the other end of the property, hiding the river I knew was back there. I stayed within eyesight of the manor, not wanting to get anywhere near the water. I'd had enough excitement there to hold me for a very long time. At the end of October, I ran across Philip, head of the stables. He was a brusque man who didn't speak very often, and his hair was wild, making him look intimidating, but he seemed passionate about his horses. Horses have as much personality in them as people, he said gruffly as he introduced me to the 15 horses in the stables. If you don't connect with any of them, don't try to force it. It's like forcing a friendship, awkward and useless, and it'll make both of you miserable. Long as you remember that, you should be all right. His stallions were powerful and fast, and with my luck, I'd have fallen and broken something, so even though I liked spending time grooming them, I never asked to ride them. At first, Philip refused to let me anywhere near them with a brush, and I didn't take it too personally. He didn't let anyone near them, even allowing me inside the stables to see them was more than Ava got. On my third attempt, however, he grudgingly gave me permission. To help groom them, as long as he was supervising. I had a sneaking suspicion Henry had something to do with his change of heart, but I didn't ask. I need to go, really quickly. I'm sorry. In the afternoons, I was allowed to do whatever I wanted. Sometimes I stayed inside and read or spent time with Ava, and sometimes I went outside and explored the grounds. Past the edge of the elaborate garden was a forest that grew wild, and it extended through the other end of the property, hiding the river I knew was back there. I stayed within eyesight of the manor, not wanting to get anywhere near the water. I'd had enough excitement there to hold me for a very long time. At the end of October, I ran across Philip, head of the stable. Oh, I already read that part. Okay. I have no idea why it did that. God, I just lost what I was reading. There we go. I'll wait for it to come back. It's loading. There it goes. At first, Philip refused to let me anywhere near them with a brush, and I didn't take it too personally. He didn't let anyone near them, even allowing me inside the stables to see them was more than Ava got. On my third attempt, however, he grudgingly gave me permission to help groom them, as long as he was supervising. I had a sneaking suspicion Henry had something to do with his change of heart, but I didn't ask. For the rest of the autumn, it was how I spent my afternoons, and though the weather grew colder, it remained warm in the stables. As the weeks passed, I grew more and more comfortable in my new home. The rest of the staff stopped staring as I went by, and slowly, we all got used to one another. It was almost peaceful with my days spent with Irene, my afternoons with Philip and Ava, and my evenings with Henry, and my nights. I lived for my nights, when I told my mother everything that was happening, and she was there to listen. Past the hedges she was dying, but inside my dreams she was still very much alive, and I wanted to keep her that way as long as possible. I knew I wouldn't be able to escape the dark reality waiting for me once this was over, but for now I could pretend that living in Eden meant remaining untouched by the real world. It was mid-November when Irene announced that my first test would be given the following Monday. By the time I left for the room, I was nearly sick with anxiety, and it must have shown. "Kate," said Calliope in a concerned voice as I shut the door behind me. "There's a test," I said shakily, "on Monday." She seemed less than concerned. "Have you never taken a test before?" I shook my head. She didn't understand. "Test," I repeated. "The kind where my whole future's on the line. If I fail." Calliope's eyes widened. "Oh, that sort of test." "Yeah." I started walking in the direction of my bedroom, not interested in lunch. My appetite had vanished. Kate, dining room's this way. They made fried chicken for you." I could hear her trotting to keep up with me, but I didn't slow down. I need to study. If I failed, everything I'd done so far would be pointless. My mother would die. Henry would lose his place as ruler of whatever it was he did, and Ava's death would have been for nothing. I wasn't about to let that happen. I spent the next 2 days with my nose buried so deeply in Greek mythology, or history as everyone seemed to call it, that Irene made sure I knew when a story was really just a myth. Yet even Henry left me alone at night. Instead of going to the dining room, my meals were brought to me, and I ate so quickly that it was tasteless. I slept for exactly 8 hours and not a minute more, and even while I was sleeping, my mother quizzed me on the material I studied. I memorized the 12 labors of Hercules, the names of the 9 muses, and the plagues released when Pandora opened her box. But there were still hundreds of other stories. King Midas, whose touch turned everything, including his daughter, into gold. Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods, gave it to the humans, and was punished for it. Icarus, who flew to escape his prison, only to fly so high that the wax that held his wings together melted. Hera's jealousy, Aphrodite's beauty, Ares' rage. It was never ending, and I became so immersed in it that it all started to blend together, but I had to pass. "You're hurting yourself." I jumped when I heard Henry's voice behind me. It was Sunday evening, less than 12 hours before I was due to take the exam, and I still had a few tricky chapters to review. If I didn't use every last minute I had and skip breakfast the next morning, I wasn't going to make it. "I'm fine," I mumbled, sparing him only a glance before looking back at the massive book Irene had given me. I was trying to read about the Minotaur, but the words swam in front of me and I had to squint to focus. My head was pounding, and I felt sick to my stomach, but I had to do this. If I didn't know any better, I would mistake you for one of the dead, said Henry, his voice in my ear. I shut my eyes, not daring to move, not when he was so close. I could feel the heat radiating off his body, much warmer than the cool air of my room, and the desire to close the distance between us overwhelmed me. I shivered. Usually, when I wasn't so tired, I was better at ignoring it. I was here for my mother, not for Henry. Instead of Henry touching me, I heard pages rustle. When I looked, the book was closed and pushed to the side, and Henry sat across from me. If you do not know it by now, you will not learn it in time for your test. His voice was gentle. You need to sleep. I can't, I said miserably. I have to pass. You will pass, I promise. I slumped in my seat. What? Can you predict the future now, too? You can't promise me that. For all you know, I'll fail so spectacularly that they'll come halfway through their test and take me away. You might never see me again. He chuckled, and I huffed indignantly. I have never seen anyone study so hard for a test as you have done this weekend. If you do not pass, then there is no hope for the rest of us. Before I could point out exactly how bad my luck was, the door to the room burst open. Ava skipped inside, followed closely by Calliope and a man I didn't recognize. Kate, she said, bouncing over to me. I gave Henry an apologetic look, but he didn't seem to mind. Instead, he was watching the man, who was dressed in a black uniform, and stared at the floor as if he wanted to be anywhere but here. Ava, I'm supposed to be studying, I said, but this didn't deter her at all. Come on, you've been studying all weekend. You have to come out to play sometime. She stuck out her lower lip in a pout. Everyone's in the garden having fun. There's music and swimming and all sorts of stuff. I still need to teach you, you know. The prospect of being forced to swim was enough to put me off the whole idea, and I wasn't even sure I'd be able to make it down there anyhow, let alone enjoy myself. The fact that it was a party pretty much guaranteed I wouldn't. I'm really tired, I said, glancing between Eva and Calliope, who was lingering at the door and eyeing Henry. So what? You can sleep later, said Ava. You're smart, you'll pass. Besides, you have to meet Theo. You two have not yet met? Henry sounded surprised. He stood, beckoning for the man in the background to come forward. Theo moved crisply, and he had a look about him that made it clear he took himself very seriously. Kate, this is Theo, my master of the guard. It is his job to keep an eye on everything that happens within the manor. Theo, this is Kate Winters. A pleasure, said Theo, dipping his head in a bow. I flashed him a tired smile, and stuck out my hand. He shook it gingerly, as if he were afraid I'd break. His palm was smoother than mine. Nice to meet you, too, I said. Ava talks about you a lot. I do not, protested Ava. She looked at Theo and frowned. I don't. She does, I said, and Theo grinned. There was no resemblance between him and Ella at all as far as I could see. Come on, let's go, said Ava in a huff, tugging on his arm. Sensing I wounded her pride, when she glanced back at me on her way out, I gave her an apologetic shrug. I'll come to the next one, I promise. Whatever, she said, pulling Theo away. He managed a quick bow in Henry's direction before exiting, leaving me alone with Henry and Calliope, who still lingered by the door. I guess I'll see you tomorrow again, she said, her cheeks bright red. Tomorrow, I said, forcing a smile. I wasn't bullying anyone. Even I could hear the nervousness in my voice. Once Calliope was gone and the door closed, Henry stood and crossed the room to the large bay window. As he stared out into the inky night, he beckoned for me to join him. Henry, I can't, I said with a sigh. I've got to study. I will ask Irene not to quiz you on the last 100 pages, said Henry. Now come and sit with me, please. I don't think she'll agree to that, I mumbled, but I did as he asked. My feet dragged against the carpet and my head felt too heavy for my body, but somehow I got to the other side of the room without collapsing. Once I was there, he wrapped his arm securely around me, and another pleasant shiver ran down my spine. It was the most physical contact I'd had with him since arriving, and it was easy enough to lean against him, letting him support my weight. Look up, he said, his arm tightening around my shoulders as I rested against him. I turned my head toward the ceiling, but in the candlelight it was too dim for me to see. He chuckled. No, the sky. Look at the stars. My face flushed with embarrassment, and I focused on the black sky through the window, just able to make out the pinpricks of light. They're pretty. They are, he said. Did you know they move? Stars? Sure. Was this part of a lesson, too? You see different stars during different times of the year. He eased us both down onto the bench, so close that I was practically sitting on top of him, but being near him was much nicer than I wanted to admit. I wasn't willing to give it up yet. Not through the seasons, he said. Through the millennia. See that star there? He pointed upward, and I could barely see the direction he was pointing in, let alone tell which one he was talking about. Yeah? If he knew that I was lying, he indulged me anyway. When I met Persephone, that star wasn't part of that constellation. Really? My oversaturated mind barely processed this information, let alone what it implied. I didn't think they did that. Everything changes with time, said Henry, his breath warm against my ear. One must simply be patient. Yes, I thought, everything changed with time. That was the problem, wasn't it? But whatever Henry was trying to do to take my mind off the test worked. That night, instead of worrying about nymphs and heroes, my mother and I wandered through Central Park, visiting the zoo and riding the carousel round and round until we were both dizzy from the laughter. I slept better than I had in days, and when I woke up, I was smiling. The next morning, I was too nervous to eat, but Calliope made a shallow piece of toast covered in strawberry jam anyhow. Even that threatened to come up as I walked to the classroom, and it was through sheer willpower alone that I managed to keep it down. I could do this. Henry was depending on me, and he would never let them purposefully make me fail without giving me a fair shot. I'd studied, and this wasn't rocket science, it was mythology. How hard could it be? Ready? Said Irene once I was seated. No, I said flatly, I'd never be ready for this. Instead of showing me the tiniest bit of sympathy, she laughed and set the test down in front of me. A knot of horror caught in my throat when I flipped to the final question. 20 pages. 200 questions, she said, as if reading my mind. You can only miss 20. How long do I have? I choked. As long as you need. Her kind smile wasn't the least bit reassuring. Summoning every last ounce of determination I had, I picked up my pencil and began. 3 hours later, I sat anxiously in the corner as Irene went through my exam. I'd gone through every question in my mind over and over again, constantly second-guessing my answers. What if I'd mixed up Athena and Artemis, Hera and Hestia? What if I'd studied too much and accidentally mixed up places and stories and intricate timelines? What if I'd failed? Irene sat down her pen, her face pensive as she crossed the room and silently handed me the test. My hand shook so badly that I was afraid I'd drop it, and nothing in her expression gave away my score. I forced myself to look down. For a long moment my eyes wouldn't focus on the number scrawled on the top. 173. I'm sorry, she said, but I didn't hear her. Instead, I stumbled toward the door and out of the room, my vision too blurry for me to see where I was going. Flying past Calliope and Ella, I barely noticed them, instead dashing through the first door I saw and bursting into the garden. Ignoring the voices calling my name, I kicked off my shoes and ran toward the forest, the biting wind numbing my skin. I'd failed. Chapter 11. Failure. I couldn't breathe. My lungs burned and my body ached with the effort of running. I was in the middle of the forest now, though still within the confines of Henry's property. The hedge walls were nowhere in sight, but those weren't what I was looking for. I wanted to find the river. 7 points below what I needed. 7 questions were the difference between the success and failure, staying and leaving, life and death for my mother. Life and death for Henry. It didn't matter how comfortable I was here, or whether or not I liked being around him. If he just wanted someone to spend time with, he could have chosen anyone, but he'd chosen me. He depended on me, and now I'd failed him. The only reason I was here was to pass those tests, and I couldn't even manage that much. I don't know how long it took me sprinting through the woods. My feet were bleeding and bruised, and more than once I stumbled, hurting my ankles and elbows and knees, but still I pushed on. I'd failed. It was over, but I wouldn't have another shot. I needed to see my mother before she died. I needed to tell her goodbye, even if she couldn't hear me in that body anymore. It would have to do, though. I'd broken my side of the bargain, and therefore Henry had no reason to uphold his. There was no guarantee I would see her if I fell asleep, and I needed to say goodbye before it was too late. Finally, I found it, the river where this whole mess had started. Limping on a twisted ankle, I followed it upstream until the opening in the hedge appeared. It seemed smaller than I remembered, and I had no idea how I was going to get to the other side, but I had to do this. I would apologize to Henry later. Wiping my dirty, tear-stained cheeks with the back of my hand, I set my bare foot in the water and gasped. It was freezing. The current was strong, and I knew if I slipped I wouldn't be able to swim my way to safety, not this time. Still, I had to try. One foot in front of the other, that's all it took. Kate! I nearly pitched forward at the sound of Henry's voice. I was a few feet away from the shore, balancing precariously on the same slippery rocks that had killed Ava, and I barely managed to catch myself. Leave me alone. I didn't sound nearly as vicious as I'd intended. I'm afraid I can't do that. I failed. I didn't dare risk turning to look at him. Yes, Irene told me. That still does not explain why you're risking life and limb to get through a hole in the hedge. If you want to leave, the front gate is much more convenient. My feet were numb, making me even clumsier than before. I need to see my mother. Without warning, Henry's arm wrapped around my waist, pulling me against him. Before I could protest, my feet touched land. Let me go. He held on long enough for me to regain my balance. I pulled away from him, trembling, though whether it was from the cold or how furious I was, I didn't know. If you leave, he said patiently, your mother will die. I did not think you wanted that. I opened and shut my mouth. But I failed. He gave me a curious look. I am not strict that I punished failure with death. But our deal, you said you'd keep my mother alive while I was still here. I can't stay here any more, not when I failed the test. Henry was still, and his expression softened as if he finally understood. Kate, is that all this is about? You said yourself I couldn't fail any of the tests, I said uncertainly. You cannot fail any of the 7 tests the Council will place before you. The exam Irene gave you is not one of those. He smiled hollowly. So far you are doing beautifully. My mouth went dry. So far? Yes, he seemed amused, and I wasn't sure whether to be relieved or to wipe the smug look off his face. So far you have faced 3. Only 1 is complete, but you are impeccable. How was it possible that they were testing me without my knowledge? When I opened my mouth to ask, he neatly cut me off. You must be freezing. Here. He draped a coat over my shoulders, and I clung to it, soaking in its warmth. Let's go back, shall we? I nodded, my hysterics coming to an end. Henry wrapped his arms around me delicately as if I were afraid I'd break. Close your eyes, he murmured, and I did. This time, when I opened them, I was only marginally surprised to find myself in my bedroom. Henry stood beside me. I see you are adjusting to the way I travel. Uh-huh, I swallowed. It was still disorienting. I gestured down at my dress. It was torn and caked with mud. It seems that 1 is ruined. Perhaps we ought to find a replacement. I have tons, really. I glanced at my wardrobe, blanching. Ella probably won't even notice. Do not argue, said Henry. Change and ice your ankle for a few minutes. I will return shortly to fetch you. Sighing inwardly, I decided that it was useless. Just like Ella, he seemed to be determined to keep me up to my ears in itchy dresses. I couldn't wait for summer to arrive, if for no other reason than to finally be able to wear jeans again. Before walking out of the door, Henry turned. Kate? I scowled down at the maze of buttons that lined the ruined dress, my fingers still shaking as I tried to undo them. Yeah? I only scored 164. In the end, I needed Ella's help to unbutton the monstrosity she'd forced me into that morning. While she seemed sad to see it go, I couldn't have been happier, until I saw that she intended to replace it with. Limping down the corridor of an unfamiliar wing, I leaned on Henry for support and tried my best not to scratch at the rough fabric. It was completely unfair. Henry got to wear pants. Even Ava had the option if she wanted. But with Ella in charge of my wardrobe, I was stuck in costumes from the Dark Ages. She may have thought they were beautiful, but I would have preferred a toga to those instruments of torture. No amount of wearing them was going to make me like them. Ever. And Ella knew that. It was why she did it. I was sure of it. While I wondered whether or not it'd be a mark against me if I ran around in my underwear, Henry opened the door to a room I'd never been inside before. At first I couldn't make out much from behind him, but when he stepped aside my jaw dropped, and the cloud of misery that had plagued me since seeing my score dissipated. The suite was stuffed with clothes hanging off of racks, arranged by size and color, and God only knew what else. They spanned so many eras that it looked like a costume shop, and there were dresses and shoes and shawls, and my knees went weak. Sweaters and jeans. Ella mentioned you did not feel comfortable in the outfits she chose for you, said Henry. As a reward for failing a test with a higher score than my own, I believe a new wardrobe is in order. I stared at him and then Ella, who gave me a rare smile. Were they for real? OMG! I wasn't the only one to say it. Instead of the high-pitched squeal came from behind me, and when I whirled around, Ava stood there, her mouth open. Calliope lingered nearby, looking as excited as I felt. Are these all for you? Blurted Ava, moving past Ella to stand with me. I think so, I said with a grin. Want some? She stared at me like I'd grown another head. Do I want some? I laughed and looked at Henry. Can she? Of course. That was all she needed to hear. In an instant she disappeared. Sorting through the archaic dresses I had no intention of touching. Instead of joining her, I turned to Calliope and Ella. You two can have whatever you want, too, I said, glancing at Henry. If that's all right with you, I mean. He nodded. Just like Ava, Ella and Calliope rushed into the room, leaving me behind with Henry. He gestured toward my ankle. Are you able to make it through the room without assistance? I'll be fine, I said, eyeing the piles of sweaters. Even from a distance, they beckoned. As much as I liked being near Henry, I was still embarrassed about my breakdown, and I didn't want him to think I was incapable of getting through the day without him, even though he did seem to know exactly how to make things better. I limped halfway across the room before I realized he was trailing a few feet behind me. Glancing over my shoulder, I frowned. Henry, really, I'm fine. It doesn't even hurt. I have no intention of helping you walk, he said in an innocent voice I wasn't buying. I was merely going to offer to carry your things. If you say so. I raised an eyebrow, but while I didn't want him to know it, I was grateful he was there. That night, long after Henry left, I was on the edge of sleep when a soft knock on my door pulled me away. Groaning, I rubbed my eyes and rolled out of bed. Hobbling to the door, I'd spent all evening looking forward to telling my mother what I'd passed the test and hadn't disappointed Henry yet, so whoever was on the other side of the door had to have a darn good reason for interrupting. What? I said as I cracked open the door, squinting against the light from the hallway. It was Ava. "Are you still awake?" she whispered, and I glared at her. "No, I'm sleepwalking." "Oh," she eyed me as if she were trying to figure out if I was telling the truth or not. "As long as you're up, come on, I want to show you something." She reached out to take my hand, and I stood my ground. "The only place I want to go is back to bed." "Too bad." Ava gripped my hand so hard that trying to pull away would have likely resulted in broken fingers, and I was having enough trouble with my ankle already. "I'll get you back to bed before sun comes up, I promise." Not the most comforting reassurance, but she wasn't giving me much of a choice, finally huffing loudly, so she couldn't miss it. I followed her, the carpet rough against my bare feet. "Where are we going?" I said, but Ava shushed me as we turned the corner. There were guards stationed up and down the hallways leading to my rooms, and at last 3 of them had seen us so far, so I had no idea why she felt the need to sneak around. The dull ache in my ankle turned into sharp pain, and I struggled to keep up with her, but she didn't slow down. At last, when we reached a dark corridor, she stopped and pointed to a door 10 feet away. It was different from the others in the manor, made of dark wood with ornate carvings, and created a scene I couldn't quite make out. Light spilled out from the other side, and Ava tiptoed toward it, gesturing for me to follow. This time I didn't ask any questions. I moved with her clumsily, keeping a hand against the wall to keep myself from tripping and announcing our presence to whoever was behind the door. The closer we got, the clearer the scene on the door became, and soon I realized what it was. On the top half of the door was a beautiful meadow, with tiny flowers carved into the wood and trees on either side. Somehow the artist had managed to make it look sunny, and it reminded me so strongly of Strintoul Park that a lump caught in my throat, but underneath it the scene changed. A layer of earth separated the meadow from a dark river that flowed underneath, and beside it there was a delicate garden. Instead of growing from the soil, it grew from jagged stone. The trees weren't trees, they were made of something solid, and even though it was only a piece of art, I could tell they weren't meant to be alive. And in the center of the picture stood pillars of jewels forming an arch above a single flower, tiny and weak in its surroundings. As spellbound as I was by the beautiful carvings, I overheard voices leaking through the crack in the door. At first I couldn't make them out properly, but Ava nudged me closer, and gathering my courage, I peeked into the room. Henry stood with his back to me, his shoulders hunched, as he stared at something I couldn't see. It turned enough so I could make out his profile, and something inside of me ached when I saw that his eyes were red. But he wasn't the one talking. The second voice was higher than his, but still masculine and familiar, and whoever it was spoke in hushed words laced with urgency and frustration. "You can't keep her here." I couldn't see who was talking, but I was certain I recognized his voice. That was part of the deal. "You can't force her to stay if she doesn't want to." I inched closer. Underneath me, the floorboard creaked, and I froze. From my vantage point, I could see Henry, also still, and my heart beat so loudly I wasn't sure he must have been able to hear it. But after a few tense seconds he spoke, and I exhaled. "She did not want to leave," he said tiredly. "She thought our deal had finished because she failed the exam." "You still stopped her," said the second voice. It was achingly familiar, but he spoke so low it was hard to place. "She told you twice to leave her alone, and you ignored her. Because she did not understand." Henry glared over his shoulder to a spot behind the door where the others stood. "It doesn't matter," he spoke viciously, and I glanced at Ava, but she lingered by the corner now. "You prevented her from leaving." "I can argue semantics with you all night, but the fact remains that she has not left the property," said Henry. "You have no right to ask the other members of the council to terminate the deal." "I do, and I will." A shadow passed over me, and I shrank back. "I won't let you force her to stay like you did Persephone. She isn't your prisoner, and you aren't her keeper. You can't manipulate her into this situation and then act surprised when she hates you so much she wants to leave." Malice dripped from his words, and his voice filled with venom. Across the room, Henry tensed, but he said nothing. The urge to speak up for him was overwhelming, and I badly wanted to tell whoever it was that he was an idiot. And I stayed because I wanted to help Henry, not because he was forcing me. But the words died on my lips. I'd gone for months without answers. I couldn't give up any chance I might have at finally getting them. "Let her go," said the voice quieter this time. "Persephone didn't love you, and you can't replace her no matter how hard you look. Even if you could, Kate isn't that person." "She could be." Henry's words came out choked. "My sister thinks she is. My aunt is too blinded by guilt and determination to see the situation clearly. Please, Henry." The floor creaked again as he stepped toward Henry. I could make out his arm now, and he wore a black jacket that looked far too thin for November. "Let her go before she dies too. We both know it's only a matter of time. And if you care about her at all, you'll let her go before she becomes another victim." He paused, and I held my breath. 11 girls are already dead because of you. Don't turn Kate into the 12th because of your selfishness." The sound of breaking glass exploded inches away from me. I gasped and stumbled backward, and my ankle twisted underneath me again. I cried out, falling to the ground. The door opened, and the blood drained from my face when I saw who was on the other side. James. Chapter 12. James. "You're in on this too?" My voice was hoarse, and I stared at James in disbelief. He looked exactly like I remembered him from school. Ears sticking out, his blond hair a mess, and his massive headphones wrapped around his neck. "Kate," he started, and Henry appeared in the door, and he pushed James aside. When Henry offered me his hand, I took it, glaring at James. "What's going on?" The words came out strangled, and I could hardly speak straight. But I wasn't going to give either of them a way out. "Tell me first, Sophia, then Irene, now you." "Perhaps it would be best if we continued this conversation inside," said Henry with a grimace. I gritted my teeth and nodded, leaning on him as he helped me into the room. Inside, I realized it was a bedroom. While it wasn't dusty, it had the feeling of disuse, and as Henry helped me maneuver around the broken glass on the hardwood floor, I saw a mangled frame lying on the ground, its picture bent and torn. Smiling up at me was a photograph of a girl who couldn't have been much older than me, with freckled cheeks and strawberry blonde hair. Next to her stood Henry, and he looked much happier than I'd ever seen him, all of the tension from his body gone. "Who's that?" I said, but I had a sinking feeling I already knew. Henry glanced at the picture, and pain flashed across his face. He waited until he'd helped me to the bed before answering, and even then he wouldn't look me in the eye. "Persephone," he said in a fragile voice that threatened to break. "A very long time ago." "Not too long ago," I said, eyeing the image. "Not if you had cameras around." "It is not a photograph," he said, bending down to retrieve it. "It is a reflection. Look." His hands shook as he handed me the picture, and as I examined it, I noticed it had a depth to it that photographs don't. It seemed to shimmer as if it was a pool of water, and Persephone and Henry were moving. Not so much that it looked like a home movie, but she blinked and I could see his arms tighten around her. "She's beautiful," I said softly. Part of me was jealous, knowing that I could never live up to her in memory, but I was so consumed by sadness from what Henry must have gone through that I pushed it aside. "I'm sorry." He waved dismissively, as if it were no big deal. But when I handed the picture back to him, he took it gently and passed his hand over the surface. It smoothed out as if it had never been damaged. "As I said, it was a long time ago." A cough tore my attention away from him, and I looked up to see James lingering near the doorway. My eyes narrowed. "What?" "You asked why I was here." He crossed his arms and leaned against the door, shutting it firmly. Behind it I heard a squeak. Ava was still out there, but this wasn't something I wanted her to overhear. "And you still haven't told me." I winced as Henry gently touched my ankle. "He's my successor," said Henry, and I looked at him sharply. "He will take over my duties if I fade." A wave of horror washed over me, and I stared at James, disgusted. "Is that why you tried to stop me from coming here? You knew I was his last chance, and you thought, if you stopped me, you'd have a clear shot at the winner's circle?" "There is no winner's circle," said James. "It isn't some competition, all right? This is hard on all of us. We've been trying for a century to find someone to take Persephone's place, and if you don't, then you get to take Henry's place," I snapped. "Yet here you are trying to ruin it for him, because I thought you wanted out," he said, his jaw clenched so tightly that he could see a muscle twitch. "You said Henry was right. I didn't understand, and I'm not about to walk away and kill him if I can help it." James shifted awkwardly from one foot to the other. "I never thought you would, but in terms of the agreement are final, and if you want to leave, there isn't anything we can do to stop you. If Henry holds you here against your will, then we have every right to step in." "Wait," I said, as what he was saying slowly dawned on me. "What do you mean, we?" Next to me, Henry frowned, his brow furrowing so deep that for a moment he didn't look like himself. "James," he said, a warning. James straightened, his arms falling to his side. "I don't care if she knows. The others will," he said, but he made no move to stop him. James took a hesitant step toward me, as if he wanted to reach out to me, but I gave him a cold look and he fell short. "I'm a member of the council." My heart nearly stopped. "You're on the council?" I sputtered. "You can't be. You." "Astute observation," he said, more to himself than to me. "Listen, Kate, I don't care if you believe me or not. Well, no, I'd like it if you did, but I don't expect you to. You can hate me all you want for trying to take you away from Henry, but I'm only trying to do what's best for you. And you think what's best for me is to live the rest of my life knowing I'm the reason Henry dies?" Hot tears threatened to spill out of my eyes, but I blinked them back, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Not to mention what's going to happen to my mother. You wouldn't remember any of this if you decide to leave," said James. "That's also part of the deal." "Enough about the stupid deal." My voice broke and my cheeks turned hot. "This is my decision, not yours. You can't go behind my back and end this just because you think you know what's best for me. I get to say when this is over, not you." I looked back and forth between Henry and James to make sure they were both paying attention, but Henry was concentrating on my ankle, his head bent and his eyes closed. A thick warmth spread out from my knee to my toes, and Henry wrapped his hand around the joint, gently moving it in a circle. "Does this hurt?" he said, and I shook my head. He set my leg down, and I gingerly pulled it toward me, wriggling my toes. It didn't ache any more. "How did you—" I started, but my anger momentarily forgotten, and Henry shrugged. "You're not supposed to heal her," said James, across the room. Henry righted himself, and even from the side I could see the deadened look in his eyes. "It seems we are breaking all sorts of rules tonight." He stood. "If you will excuse me." Before I could protest, he was gone, leaving me and James alone in the room together. I stood as well, testing my ankle. It was solid. "It wasn't my choice, you know," said James quietly, "taking over for him if you fail. I'm the only member of the council who knows the underworld as well as he does." "But you still wanted it," I said. He looked away out a dark bay window and onto the grounds. The moon was nearly full, and I could see the tops of the bare trees rustling in the November wind. "We'll last as long as what we represent does. Minor gods fade all the time when they're forgotten, but the council isn't minor. As long as humanity exists, there will always be love and war. There will always be music and art, literature and peace, and marriage and children and travelers. But humanity won't last forever, and after it fades, so will we. Only death will remain. And if you control the underworld, you get to survive even after everything else is gone?" I said it as a question, but I already knew the answer, and a knot formed in my throat. "That's what this is about?" "No, right here, this is about making sure you survive. I don't want you to die, Kate, please. None of us do, and Henry gave up a long time ago. Maybe he's trying for you, but not because he wants to continue. He just doesn't want you to be killed, that's all." I paused. "Is there a good chance of that?" James looked at me, and I couldn't see the naked fear in his eyes. "No one survived past Christmas. Please, Henry doesn't want this. He's always going to be in love with Persephone, not you. Look around. Look where you are. This was her bedroom." There was nothing unusual about the room, only the picture that Henry had thrown at James, but the more I studied my surroundings, the more I really saw it. It was like a child's room that a parent didn't dare touch after tragedy struck. There was old-fashioned hairpins on the vanity in the corner, and the curtains were drawn to let the sunlight in. There was even a dress lying on the corner, waiting to be worn. It was like it was frozen in time, lying untouched for centuries until Persephone returned. That reflection, James gestured to the image of Persephone and Henry together looking so happy. "It isn't real. It's a wish, a dream, a hope, not a memory. He loved her so much that he'd have torn the world apart if she'd asked him to." But she could barely stand to look at him. "Ever since she died, he's been begging the council to release him and let him fade. Do you really think you can compete with that?" "It isn't a competition," I said roughly, echoing his words from before, but even as I said it, I knew it was. If I couldn't make Henry care about me, he would have no reason to continue, and in his mind I would always be pitted against Persephone. But that was no reason to stop fighting for him. He deserved a chance at happiness just like I did, and I wasn't ready to let another person in my life goodbye. James' expression softened. "He will never love you, Kate, not the way you deserve to be loved. He gave up a long time ago, and all you're doing is prolonging the pain for him. It would be kinder to leave him be." I stepped closer to James, torn between anger and pressing need to touch him, to make sure my James was still there underneath the cunning god he'd suddenly become, and saying all the words he thought I needed to hear to convince me to leave. To steal eternity from Henry and hand it to him. "And you think I should," I said. I was barely a foot away from him now. "You think I should give up and leave him just like Persephone left?" "Persephone had her reasons," said James. "He took her away from everything she ever loved, and he forced her to stay with him when she didn't want to. You'd have done the same." I was silent. The difference between me and Persephone was that she'd had something left to lose. James reached forward timidly, and I let him wrap his arms around me, burying his face in my hair. I heard him inhale deeply, and I wondered if he could smell the lavender of my shampoo, if it was fear or guilt and determination he sensed instead. After a tense moment, I returned to the embrace. "Please don't do this to yourself, Kate," he mumbled into my ear. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I pretended that he was just James again, not Henry's rival, not the god poised to gain everything from my failure, but my James. "Will you do something for me?" I said against his chest. "Of course," he said. "Anything." I let go of him. "Get the H away from me and don't come back until spring." His eyes widened. "Kate!" "I mean it." My voice shook, but I stood firm. "Get out." Stunned, he stepped back and shoved his hands in his pockets. For a moment he looked like he was going to say something, but then he turned away and walked out, leaving me alone in Persephone's bedroom. I'd spent 4 years refusing to let my mother give up, and I wasn't about to let Henry do the same. If he wouldn't keep going for himself, then I'd come up with a way to make him keep going for me instead. Hours later, long after the moon had risen so high in the sky that I could no longer see it from my window, I lay in bed and stared up at the ceiling. I wanted to sleep and tell my mother everything I'd learned, to ask her what I could possibly do to convince Henry to try, but I knew there was nothing she could tell me that I didn't already know. I wasn't up to her to fix this. I was the one who'd made the deal, and I wasn't going to give up so easily. In the small hours of the morning I heard a soft knock on my door, and I buried my face in my pillow. Ava was gone when I crept out of Persephone's room, and I wasn't in the mood to tell her what had happened. I needed a day or two to figure things out for myself before the entire manor knew too, if they didn't already. Even though I stayed silent, I heard the door open and shut, and soft footsteps fall against the carpet. I remained as still as possible, hoping whoever it was would go away. Kate? I didn't have to turn around to recognize Henry's voice. Something thrummed inside of me, a familiar note that sent a wave of comfort through my tense body, but I still didn't face him. He moved so quietly that I didn't know if he was close until I felt the mattress give way. It was a long moment before he said anything. "I'm sorry." His voice was hollow. "You shouldn't have seen that." "I'm glad I did." "And why is that?" I refused to answer. How was I supposed to tell him that I didn't want him to give up? I was risking everything for him, and I would gladly do it, but I wouldn't let it be for nothing. I couldn't make him fight, but I would find a reason for him not to fade. I heard Henry sigh. Forcing silence was only hurting things. So finally I said into my pillow, "Why didn't you tell me about James earlier?" "Because I thought you might react this way, and I wanted to keep you from this pain for as long as possible." "Knowing it's him doesn't hurt," I said. "What hurts is that no one trusts me with anything around here." I felt his hand on my arm, but it only lasted a moment. "Then I will make the effort to trust you with more. I apologize." His apology was hollow to my ears, whether he really meant it or not. "If I pass, things are going to change, all right? Life won't be one big game of keep away from Kate anymore. Because if the answer to that is anything but a resounding yes, I don't think I can do this." He brushed the back of his hand against my cheek, but it too only lasted a second. "Yes," he said, "a resounding yes. It is not that I don't trust you now. It is only that there are some things you simply cannot know yet. As frustrating as it may seem, I promise you that it is for your own good. For my own good." Apparently that was their go-to excuse when they did something I didn't like. "And Persephone," I added, glad I was turned away and couldn't see the pain I knew was in his eyes when I said her name. "I'm not her, Henry. I can't be her. And I can't spend eternity trying to live up to your memory of her. I'm nobody to you right now. I get that." "You are not nobody," he said with a surprising strength. "Do not think that. Let me finish." I hugged my pillow tighter. "I get that I'm not her and I won't ever be. I don't want to be her anyway, not with how badly she's hurt you, but if this works, if I pass, I need to know that when you look at me, you're going to see me, not just her replacement. That there's more to this future for me than standing in the shadows while you wallow the rest of your existence away. Because if James is right, and I can walk away if I want to, and if you're doing this knowing full well that spending half of the rest of eternity with me is going to make you miserable no matter what I do, then tell me now, and I'll spare us both." The seconds ticked by, and Henry was silent. It was unfair that he was so willing to throw away forever, when there were others out there, my mother included, who wanted to live but couldn't. As I stared out the window resolutely, my anger built. But short of yelling at him before he had the chance to respond, I had no release. "I brought you a present." My head turned toward him a fraction of an inch before I could stop myself. "That isn't an answer." "Yes, it is," he said, and I could hear his small smile in his voice. "I would not have brought you something like this if I did not want you to stay." I frowned. "What kind of present is it?" "If you roll over, you will see." Before I had the chance, something nudged my shoulder, something cold, wet, and very much alive. Flipping around, I sat up and stared at the black and white ball of fur sitting next to me on the bed. It looked up at me with liquid eyes, its tiny tail wagging. My heart melted, all of my anger and frustration temporarily forgotten. "If I did not truly feel that you could change things, I would not have risked your life to begin with," said Henry. "I am sorry you feel you are nobody to me, Kate, because the very opposite is true, and I could never expect you to be Persephone," he added, the same hint of pain in his voice. "You are you, and as soon as I am able, I will tell you everything, I promise." I stared at the puppy, too afraid to say anything and make him change his mind. Was he just like James, saying what he thought I wanted to hear, or did he really mean it? "You lost a friend today because of me, and I did not want you to be lonely," he said, as he stroked the puppy and its tail thumped against his mattress. "It is my understanding that one does not get a pet with someone if one does not expect," he hesitated, "if one does not hope to spend quite a bit of time with that person in the future." Expect. Hope. Which one had he really meant? I wanted to tell him exactly where James could shove our so-called friendship, but it took me a moment to remember how to speak. I'd spent my entire childhood bothering my mother for a puppy, but she'd always put her foot down. After she'd gotten sick, I'd given up, unable to take care of both of her and a dog at the same time. How had Henry known that, or had he simply guessed? Is it a girl or a boy? A boy. The corners of his lips twitched upward into a faint smile. I do not wish for Cerberus to get any ideas. I hesitated. He's mine? All yours. You can even take him with you in the spring if you would like. I scooped the little dog up, cradling him to my chest. Standing on my arm, he licked my chin, barely able to reach. "Thank you," I said softly. "This is really nice of you." "It is my pleasure," said Henry, standing. "I will leave you be and allow you a chance to get to know one another. He is quite friendly, I assure you, and very much alive. He is still learning etiquette, and he is an eager pupil." The puppy jumped higher, managing to reach my cheek. I grinned, and as Henry placed his hand on the door, I said, "Henry?" "Yes?" I pressed my lips together, trying to come up with the right combination of words to make him want to stay, to make him want to try for more than just my sake. Nothing came, so instead, after a moment that seemed to stretch out far past the point of politeness, I said in a small voice, "Please don't give up." When he finally responded, his voice was so low that I could barely hear him. "I will try." "Please," I said again, this time urgently. "After everything that's happened, you can't. I know you miss her, but—" Silence lingered between us. "But what? Please, give me a chance." He looked away, and through the dim light, I saw his shoulders hunch as if he were trying to make himself as small as possible. "Of course," he said, opening the door. "Sleep well." I nuzzled the top of my puppy's head. I didn't want him to leave. I wanted to play cards or talk or read, anything that didn't remind him of Persephone. After the night he'd had, he deserved that much. We both did. "Stay," I blurted, "please." But when I looked up, he was gone. Chapter 13. Christmas. For the next several weeks, my time with Henry was almost unbearable. While we still spent our evenings together, it was no longer easy, and every conversation and accidental touch strained. He never looked me in the eye, and the closer we got to Christmas, the more he seemed to pull away. The more he pulled away, the more I wanted to tear my hair out and tell him in no uncertain terms that either he shaped up or I would walk. Problem was, it was an empty threat, and he would know it. Worse, I was afraid he would take me up on it. "I don't understand," I said, pacing up and down the sidewalk. "He acts like he wants nothing to do with me any more." My mother and I were near a playground in Central Park, and despite the deep snow that surrounded Eden Manor, as the winter solstice arrived and the first half of my stay was over, it was midsummer here. In the distance I could hear children shouting, but I was too focused on Henry's behavior to enjoy myself. "Why do you think that might be?" said my mother. She sat on a bench and watched me, looking wholly unconcerned. "I don't know," I said, frustrated. "What if he really has given up? What am I supposed to do then?" "Keep trying until you have no more chances left," said my mother. There was a hint of steel in her voice that made me wonder if she was really as passive about this as she seemed. "And even then, you keep going." I shoved my hands into my pockets. It wasn't that easy, and she knew it. James said none of the other girls had survived past Christmas. Do you think that maybe that's why he's avoiding me? He thinks I'm going to drop dead at any moment? "Perhaps," she said, "or perhaps he realized he does care about you, and he's afraid of losing you as well." I snorted. "Fat chance of that. He won't even look at me." She sighed. "You're the one spending time with him, Kate, not me. I can only go off what you tell me, and if Henry really is as miserable as he sounds, then I doubt anyone else is going to be able to pull him out of it." "And how do you suggest I do that?" I said, not meaning to snap, but it slipped out anyway. I immediately felt guilty, and I slouched toward her. She scooted over, making room for me on the bench, and I sat down next to her. "Any way you can," she said, pushing a lock of hair out of my eyes. "If you want to do this for him, then it isn't going to be easy. It won't be easy passing the rest of the tests, but I won't be as easy giving him a reason to continue either." I frowned, racking my mind for the umpteenth time in the past few weeks, trying to come up with something, but nothing came. My one flash of brilliance had gone into his Christmas present, and even that was a risk. "You are being careful, though, aren't you?" said my mother. Concern etched into her features. "I don't want anything to happen to you, but if what he says is true and there is a danger out there—" "I'm fine," I said. "Really, no one is tired of me yet, I promise, and I can't convince Henry it's worth sticking around, then I might as well kill me anyway." "Don't talk like that. I don't care what happens in the next 3 months, but you will not give up, do you understand me?" She spoke so fiercely that it startled me, and I straightened up on the bench. "I'm not going to give up," I said, "but if Henry won't even try, then he'll die, and you and my mother would die as well." I knew it was inevitable, but I wasn't ready to say goodbye yet. I still had 3 more months until the spring equinox. and I intended on soaking in every moment of our time together. I wasn't going to let Henry get in the way of that. No matter what happens to me or to Henry, you will keep going, said my mother, though in a gentler voice. Neither one of us is worth giving up like that, and if you do, you'll be no better than Henry. But I know you are, all right? I nodded mutely. If I had my mother's strength and certainty, I was positive it wouldn't be so hard to convince Henry of the same. Maybe you should talk to him. Bet he'd listen to you. He probably would. Something flickered in her eyes, something I didn't understand, but that's your job, sweetie, and I know you can do it. It was either that or let everyone around me die. I hope you're right. She gave me a noisy kiss on the cheek. I'm always right. Before either of us could say another word, the sky darkened, and I looked up confused. When I turned to my mother to ask what was happening, she was gone, replaced by the last person I wanted to see, James. What the H are you doing here? I jumped to my feet. What'd you do with my mom? It's all right, he said, standing with me. I hurried down the path, searching for my mother, but he easily kept up. Kate, listen. Your mother's safe. I want to talk to you. So you hijacked the only time I get to spend with my mother? I turned around and he stopped dead in his tracks, inches away from me. Just because you're some kind of god doesn't give you the right to do this. I told you to stay away from me. I know. He stuck his hands in his pockets, and the look on his face was so pitiful that I momentarily forgot that he was the bad guy. I just need a few minutes, and I promise everything will go back to normal. Please. I sighed irritably. Fine, you get 5 minutes. More than enough, he grinned. But when all I did was stare, his smile slowly faded. I'm not the one trying to kill you. I blinked, taken aback. That was the last thing I'd expected him to say. You're the most logical choice, I said slowly. Deny it all you want, but I'd be stupid to take you at your word without a shred of proof. He tilted his head in a strange, almost archaic kind of nod. It was a jarring reminder of who and what he was. I wouldn't ask you to, but if you'd like, you can ask Henry. I've never been involved in the testing process for obvious reasons. You're my friend, and I'd never hurt you. Is that why I've survived so long? I said waspishly. Because we're friends? His expression darkened. I told you I'm not the killer. You should know me well enough for that. Lately it doesn't seem like I know you at all, I snapped, and he at least had the decency to look sheepish. You've survived so long because everyone's gone to extraordinary measures to keep you safe, he said. The guards, the escorts, the food tasters. You have no idea how closely you're being watched. A shiver ran down my spine. After a century, you people really have no idea who's doing this? I thought gods were supposed to be omniscient. He laughed, but it was all hollow. Wouldn't that be nice? It'd solve a whole host of problems, but no, we're not. We've followed leads, changed out the staff, interrogated everyone involved, but nothing's come up. Henry's even gone to the underworld to interview the girls who were murdered, but they never saw it coming. I frowned. As difficult as me being in danger was for Henry, I couldn't imagine how much it must have hurt him to talk to the girls who had died because of this, whom he undoubtedly thought had died because of him. So what? I said exasperatedly, to mask my fear. If you guys can't come up with something, there's no hope for me figuring it out. So why are you telling me this? Because I want you to be safe, he said. You don't have to trust me in order to at least listen to what I'm saying, and do what you have to do to protect yourself. Henry's cut off every method the killers used to attack before, and that means they'll try something else. Henry knows it, we all know it, and you should as well. Great, I said, rolling my eyes. So instead of poisoned food, I should be on the lookout for a swarm of killer bees, an anvil that's about to fall on my head? What? Anything, he said. Anything out of the ordinary. If you ever suspect something might be up, get out of there, okay? I don't care how much they seem to like you. Someone in that place wants you dead, and if you want to have any chance of survival, you can't ever forget that. I didn't respond. I'd adjusted to living in Eden Manor, and while it wasn't perfect, at least I wasn't miserable anymore. But the thought of the person who was trying to kill me might have been someone I knew and knew well shook my confidence more than I wanted to admit. I understood that it wasn't just my mother's life and Henry's life on the line. Mine was too. Why are you telling me this? I said quietly as thunder shook the air. If I die, Henry will fade, and you'll get everything you want. He stared at the ground, not everything. Before I could contemplate whether he meant losing Henry or losing me, the sky opened up, and for the first time in my dreams, it started to pour. Promise me you'll stay safe, he said over the rain. Promise me you won't do anything reckless. I nodded. No matter how desperate I was to find some small piece of happiness in the remaining shreds of my life, I wasn't willing to die for it. For my mother, yes, but not myself. Thank you, he said, his shoulders sagging with relief. I'll see you in the spring. And Kate? I looked at him, silent as the park began to fade. I'm sorry, he said, and it was the last thing I heard before darkness closed in around me, even though I was still furious with James. When I woke up gasping alone in my bed, I couldn't help but think that while I was fighting hard to save my mother's life and Henry's, maybe all James was trying to do was fight to save mine. Christmas was the only holiday my mother and I celebrated, and it was always festive. Back in New York, our tiny apartment could barely hold a tree, but we'd shoved one into the corner of the living room anyway and spent hours decorating it, a little piece of nature in a metal jungle, she would say as we stood back to admire our efforts after we were done. The towering Christmas trees spread throughout Eden Manor made our apartment trees look like twigs. Almost overnight, they seemed to crop up all over the manor, and for weeks the smell of sugar cookies lingered in the corridors. The staff was giddy with excitement, and there was a sense of joy in the air that I couldn't shake, even on my bad days. I'd expected them to celebrate the winter solstice instead, but Ella made it clear they would celebrate Christmas for me. It didn't escape me that none of the other girls had survived past Christmas, and despite how angry I was with James, I made an effort to never be alone. But the closer Christmas came, the scarcer Henry became, and that made it difficult. During the autumn, he occasionally joined me around the manor, but now the only time I saw him was in the evenings. Even then, things were as bad as ever, and despite my mother's advice, for the life of me I couldn't figure out how to give him the purpose he needed. Survive past Christmas, I hoped, but there was no guarantee that would work. I didn't allow myself to consider the possibility that I might not make it, but I did know I wanted him to have a happy Christmas. The entire household was supposed to have dinner together, and while that was a nice start, I wanted to show him the kind of Christmas my mother and I had together. Maybe if I invited him into a private part of my life, he would return the favor or at least not scowl at me anymore, and selfishly I didn't want to spend Christmas alone. On Christmas Eve day, a giant tree showed up in my room while I was eating breakfast along with 2 boxes of decorations. My lessons were cancelled due to the holiday, so I dragged Ava into my room to help me before we both had to get ready for dinner. When Henry wasn't around and she was the only one I trusted enough to be alone with for any length of time. After all, she hadn't been there for the other girls, and I was reasonably sure she wasn't going to try to kill me for not accepting Henry's offer on the autumn equinox. Come early afternoon, however, I was beginning to regret inviting her. If I'm late for my date with Xander tonight, I'm personally blaming you, said Ava grumpily as she tugged at a tangled string of lights. Nearby, my puppy, now called Pogo, watched us both with interest. Don't pull so hard, I said, bounding over to a pile of tinsel to save the lights from Ava's brutality. They're delicate, and you won't be late. I thought you were dating Theo? Not anymore, she said in a sing-song voice. I got back together with Xander, and he invited me to his room for our own private party instead of the banquet. I didn't ask. Here, help me with this. I offered her one end of the lights, and deftly undid the knot. Now go around the back. Don't step on the ornaments. Yes, just like that. She held still as I arranged the lights, though I had to use a hook to decorate the highest branches. What are you and Henry going to do tonight anyway? My secret, I said, and when I walked around to see the look on her face, I rolled my eyes. Not that. What are you and Xander going to do? That? She gave me an impish look, and I scowled. What? I'm dead. It's not like it matters anymore. Don't screw with them, Ava. I bent down to collect some of the delicate glass ornaments and ignored the image of Henry and Persephone that rose to the forefront of my mind. I needed to believe that Ava wouldn't do that to someone she loved. I mean it. This isn't a game. Henry doesn't react well to people messing around like that, and the last thing you want to do is pee him off. Please, for me. I was already teetering on the edge of failure as it was. Here, take some of these. Ava took the ornaments and started hanging them haphazardly, clustering them together and placing them on branches that bent dangerously with the added weight. I grimaced and started to rearrange them. We continued on like that for a few minutes until finally Ava whirled around to face me, startled. I dropped the ornament I was holding. and it landed on the bit of carpet I'd put down for exactly that reason. You think I'm a slut, don't you? What? I said, taking in her flushed cheeks and red eyes. She was seconds away from crying. Why do you think I think that? Because, she turned back to hanging ornaments, shaking the whole tree as she tugged. After another ornament fell, she sat down heavily on the floor. I think Xander only likes me because I'll sleep with him. Why do you think that? I said carefully as I knelt down beside her. Chances were good that she was right, but that didn't mean it was the only reason. Except for Henry, all of the guys eyed her everywhere she went, so I wasn't sure what else she'd been expecting. I don't know, she said. He never talks to me. He'll talk to me or show me things or kiss me, but if I don't sleep with him, he suddenly finds other things to do, or he'll try to make me jealous with other girls. But he's a jerk, I said flatly, and you're better off without him. She sniffed. You think? Yeah, I think. I paused. What about Theo? He was nice, wasn't he? Ava rolled her eyes, but he was so protective. It was like he never let me breathe, but yeah, she added softly, he was nice. Sensitive, but nice. Then why don't you break up with Xander? I said, especially if you'll be happier without him. But I wouldn't be. She looked at me tearfully. It's lonely here, Kate. You know that. You're so busy all of the time, and Ella doesn't like me, and I don't like Calliope. And if I don't have Xander, who else do I have? I tried to think of the right words to say, but nothing came. Ava was as alone here as I was, and while we had each other, sort of, she'd suffered just as much of a loss as I had when she died. She lost her parents, and even though she was hiding it well, it was moments like these that reminded me. I'm sorry, I said, hugging her. Even if I'm busy sometimes, I'm always here for you, and you'll always have me, I promise. Just be careful, okay? She didn't react for several seconds, but when she did, she buried her face in the crook of my neck and wrapped her arms around me. Her shoulders shook, and her breath came in gasps as she started to cry properly, and I rubbed her back as soothingly as I could, wishing I were better with this sort of thing. No one I'd known back in New York had ever broken down like this in front of me, but it seemed to help, so I stayed still, waiting for her to cry herself out. Finally, she loosened her grip and pulled back enough to look at me. When I saw the pout of her face, I knew the worst had passed. How can we be friends when you won't even let me teach you how to swim? She said, delicately wiping her eyes. That doesn't work on me, Ava, I warned. I don't care how much practice you've had on your boyfriends. Her shoulders slumped again, and I sighed. I don't want to learn how to swim, not because I don't like you or want to spend time with you, but because I'm afraid of the water. It isn't some easy thing for me to jump in and learn, okay? Her eyes widened. You're afraid of the water? Honest to God afraid? She was determined to make this as embarrassing as possible. Terrified, I said. When I was 4 or 5, I thought it'd be fun to swim in the little lake at Central Park, and I jumped in and sank like a rock. My mother had to jump in and save me. Ever since, I can't bring myself to try. Speaking about my mother so casually made my throat tighten, but luckily Ava didn't seem to notice. Instead, she eyed me calculatingly, and I knew I was in trouble. Tell you what, she said, straightening up. When the weather gets warmer, I'll teach you how to swim, and you can, I don't know, I'll owe you a huge favor. How about that? There isn't anything you could possibly offer me that would make me willing to get into the water. I stood again and picked up the ornaments. There were only a few left, and nestled underneath was a small heart-shaped box wrapped in delicate pink tissue paper. On a tag in flowery script was my name. Frowning, I picked it up. Is this from you? Ava eyed it. No, where'd you find it? With the ornaments. I untied the ribbon, but Ava snatched it out of my hand. Hey! Don't touch it, she said, setting it on the bed as if it were a bomb about to go off. You don't know where it came from. Irritated, I turned back to the ornaments. It's a Christmas present. Ava, ever heard of them? James' warning rang in my head, but all I'd tried to do was unwrap it. It wasn't stupid enough to eat something to put it on without knowing where it came from. Besides, maybe there was a signed card inside. Yours is under the bed if you want it. She ducked underneath the bed and pulled out a jewelry box wrapped in blue with her name on it. I watched her open it and reveal the gold hoop earrings inside, but while she made an effort to look excited, her eyes kept darting over toward my unexpected gift. Thanks, she said, putting them on. They're beautiful. You're welcome. I walked toward the bed. Really, Ava, it's just a present. I'm sure it isn't going to try to bite me or... Stop. Henry's voice cut through the room, and my hand froze inches away from the pink wrapping paper. He stood framed in the doorway, half a dozen guards behind him, each with their hands on their weapons. Power radiated from him in waves, and the temperature dropped so low I thought I could see my breath. For the first time I understood why everyone seemed to keep a respectful distance from him, especially when he was angry. I swallowed my unease. It's a present. Kate, said Henry coldly, step away. I did as he said, but I wasn't happy about it. Crossing my arms over my chest, I watched as he picked up the present. A shimmering bubble formed, enclosing it completely, and my mouth dropped open. How did you? I need to open it, he said. This is the safest way. Without anything to guide it, the lid rose from the box. Nestled inside was a collection of chocolates, each with a different color and shape. One with a purple flower rose above the others, and it broke in half. Instead of nougat or strawberry filling, there was a green liquid inside, and as it dripped onto the pink tissue, it made a hissing noise I could hear from several feet away. "Cancel dinner," said Henry to the guards. "Make sure everyone is in their room. I want a complete search of the manor." It took me a moment to regain the ability to speak, and when I did, my voice came out as a croak. "You can't cancel Christmas dinner." "I can and I will," he said, "and you will stay in your room tonight. Do you understand?" Did I understand? Was he crazy? "I'll stay in my room under two conditions," I said sharply. "One, after you're done searching the manor, you let everyone have Christmas dinner. There should be plenty of time for both." His mouth twitched in annoyance, but he nodded. "Fine. Your second condition?" I hesitated. There was more on the line than a happy holiday, and if you rejected it, but I had to at least try. "Two, you spend the evening with me, and enjoy it as much as you can, and," I added, "stop acting so darn cranky all the time. It's getting on my nerves." He didn't answer for several moments, and when he did, he simply nodded again, but for a split second I thought I saw a barest hint of a smile. "I will be here after the manor is secured. In the meantime, do not open any strange packages." As he walked out the door, he gestured for Ava to follow. Shrugging apologetically, she touched her new earrings and winked before following after him, leaving me alone in my suite. I sighed and collapsed on the bed, trying not to think about how long it would take them to research the manor, or how Ava had known to be suspicious of the poisoned present in the first place. I spent the rest of the afternoon decorating my room in order to keep my mind off of what had happened. With the lights down low, the tree looked magnificent, and I'd even managed to get a star on top. But the best part of the strings of twinkling lights stretched out across my bedroom. As I walked through it, I could see the colors reflected on my skin. It even smelled like sugar cookies, and all that was missing was music. By the time I'd finished, I was convinced Henry wouldn't show. It was dark out, and so late that my stomach was rumbling, and no matter how many times I asked my guards, no one seemed to be willing to tell me when he was coming. Expecting to spend Christmas alone, I changed into my pajamas and constructed a nest of pillows and blankets in the middle of the floor. As I settled down, however, I heard the door open. Henry entered, carrying a silver tray laden with savory food, and Cerberus and Pogo were hot on his heels. Silently, he offered me a cup of hot chocolate. I took the mug from him and sipped, spotting what looked like baklava on the tray. It smelled exactly like my mother used to make, and my mouth watered. "As you missed dinner, I thought you might be hungry." His tone was painfully neutral, as if he was making every effort to be polite, and he glanced uncertainly at my makeshift pile of blankets. "Is there room for one more?" "Plenty," I said, trying to sound inviting. "If sitting on the floor isn't your thing, you can pull up a chair. It works almost as well." After hesitating, he sat down next to me, and I scooted over to make room. He shifted around, looking awkward, but finally he settled. "Do you and your mother do this every year?" he said. "Henry, gather your pillows and watch the lights?" Usually. I took a sip of my cocoa. "She's been in the hospital for Christmas for the past 3 years, but we always made do." "Did you find anything while searching the manor?" "No," he said, "but the staff had their festivities as promised." I nodded, and Henry was silent and tense beside me. But at least he was there. I stared at the tree until the lights burned into my eyes, and when I looked away I could still see the pattern of colors. "What is it like to be dead?" I flushed when I realized what I blurted out, and the way he didn't answer right away only made it worse. "I would not know," he finally said. "I do not know what it is like to be alive either." I pressed my lips together. "Right, keep forgetting that." "But if you would like," he said, "I could tell you about death." I glanced up at him. "What's the difference?" "Death is the process of dying. Being dead is what happens after death has occurred." Oh, I purposefully ignored the thoughts of my mother actually dying, whether it'd be painful, if there was a bright light, or if she'd even be aware of it, but Henry wouldn't be speculating. "Please?" He tentatively stretched out his arm, and to my surprise, he settled it around my shoulders. He was still stiff, but it was the most contact we'd had in weeks. "It is not as bad as mortals tend to think. It is much the same as going to sleep. So I've been told, even when a wound causes pain, is very brief." "What?" I swallowed. "What happens after going to the sleep part? Is there a bright light?" Henry at least had the grace not to laugh. "No, there is a white light. There are gates, however," he added, giving me a meaningful look. Whatever he was trying to get me to understand didn't sink in, however, and he gave up and told me. "The gates are at the front of the property." I blinked. "Oh," then he thought about it. "Oh, you mean this. Sometimes when they may be useful," he said, "the vast majority of the time they are sent into the beyond." "What's the beyond?" "The underworld, where the souls stay for eternity." "Is there a heaven, then?" His fingers slowly wrapped around my bare arm, and I automatically leaned against him. Maybe my mother had been right. Maybe he'd been so distant because he was afraid I wouldn't make it past Christmas, or maybe he was just trying to comfort me. Either way, the contact was warm and I craved it. Initially, there were many different beliefs, so the realm was undefined, he said, his voice taking on a clinical tone. Then came more substantial religious. And then it forms Tartarus and the Elysian fields, among others. From then, as religions grew, he paused, as if choosing his words very carefully. The afterlife is whatever a soul wishes or believes it to be. The endless possibilities swam through my mind, making me dizzy. Doesn't that get complicated? It does. The time he smiled back. Which is why I cannot rule alone. James has been helping me temporarily. My mood immediately turned sour. If you can't rule alone, then how is he supposed to if you fade? Henry shifted, and for a moment I was afraid he was going to pull away. I set my hand on his, and he stilled. I do not know. If it comes to that, I will no longer be my concern. Given how he has acted about you, I would speculate he intends to ask you, but once the council rules it will be final. If you do not pass for me, you will not pass for him. The possibility of James liking me enough to put up with me for eternity, just like Henry was offering, had never occurred to me, and I took a breath, trying to keep myself from fidgeting. Henry wasn't necessarily right. James and I were just friends, even if that anymore. He knew that. They both did. What would I do? I mean, if I pass? How does this work? It is a job, as most else is, said Henry, and I could see the lights from the tree reflected in his eyes. Much of this is making rulings in disputes, or when a soul is undecided, we help them come to a greater understanding. We do not interfere unless the soul believes it will be judged. And what happens to them? I said, trying to remember what my mother was. Methodist? Lutheran? Presbyterian? Would it matter? It depends solely on their belief structure, said Henry. If they believe they will be walking around in human form, then that is what occurs. If they believe there will be nothing more than a ball of warmth and light, then so be it. What if they believe and what they want are two different things? That is also where we come in. I was silent. The prospect of spending the rest of forever ruling over the dead seemed impossible, like a faraway thing I would never reach, and I was so sure I wanted to. I wasn't doing this for the job, or even for immortality. After seeing Henry, I couldn't imagine how lonely forever could be, and I wasn't looking forward to experiencing it. What if I can't handle it? I said. What if I fail miserably and you have to find someone else? It was a long moment before he responded. That is what the tests are for. I have already done my part in choosing you, and I believe you are capable of handling it. My brothers and sisters test you because with this task comes a great amount of responsibility, and there is no room for error. If you cannot do it, then you will not. It is simple. There was nothing simple about it, but I couldn't focus on what would happen afterward, while I was still had to make it to spring. Even if I passed all the tests, if the council didn't like me, all of this speculation was pointless. I already had one vote against me with James. If they needed a unanimous ruling, it was already over. Henry, I said quietly. He stared straight ahead at the tree. You know I want to pass, right? I concluded as much, yes, given you are still here. I ignored his sarcasm. His hand was warm underneath mine, and I squeezed it. It isn't only because of my mother, it's because of you, too. I know you've been trying for a really long time, and I know I'm just another silly little girl trying to help out. And I know you think I'm going to fail, but I like you, Henry, and I'm doing this for you, too, okay? I don't want you to fade. Even though he wasn't looking at me, I could see his lips twist into a mirthless smirk. You can never be just another silly little girl, he said. I do not wish to influence you or make this more difficult on you than it already must be, but do not think I do not care about what happens to you, Kate. Perhaps it is impossible that anyone takes Persephone's place, but if that is the case, it is of no failure of your own. But if anyone is capable of it, I am certain it is you. Then please don't give up, I said. I'll never be Persephone. And I know that. We could be friends. And you wouldn't have to be alone anymore. Henry looked away, hiding his face completely from my view. But when he spoke, his voice was tight, as if he were struggling to keep it steady. I would very much like that, he said, and I released a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding and wriggled out of his grip. He didn't look at me, but he did set his hand back in his lap. Can I give you my present now? I said. I promise it's not poisoned. He rewarded my tasteless joke with a wry half-smile. I entangled myself in the blanket, stuck underneath my bed to retrieve a large package wrapped in gold and carried it over to him. To my surprise, there was a present where I had been sitting moments before. Your gift, he said, also not poisoned. Thank you, I said, and I sat down and handed him his, but he set it aside as he watched me open mine. I pushed the silver wrapping paper away, revealing a plain box. Squinting in the low light, I pulled off the lid and pushed away the tissue paper, exposing a framed black and white photo. I froze. It was my favorite picture of my mother and me from when I was 7 years old. We were in the middle of Central Park on my birthday, the exact spot where we met every night in my dreams. and we'd spread out an entire picnic only to have it ruined by a large dog that had gotten loose from its owner. The only things that had survived were the cupcakes I'd helped her make. In the picture, we sat in the middle of the mess that had been our lunch, each holding a cupcake, chocolate with purple frosting. I remembered, a smile tugging at my lips. She had her arms around me, and while we were both smiling, we weren't looking at the camera. The owner of the dog had taken a number of photos of us to make up for ruining our picnic, and in the end, this had been the one that had spent the last 11 years framed on my bedside table. But as I stared at it, I realized it wasn't the same. It had depth to it, like the picture in Persephone's room, a reflection, Henry had called it, but unlike the one with him and Persephone, this wasn't a hope or a wish. It was real. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. Henry, I don't. He held up a hand and I fell silent. Not until I've opened yours as well. I waited, my vision blurry, as he unwrapped the large box. It had taken me 4 tries to get the wrapping right. Lifting the lid, he paused. What is this? He said, puzzled as he examined the blanket I meticulously decorated. I'd refused to let anyone else help me, even though I knew it would have taken days instead of weeks if I had. It's the night sky, I said, hugging my picture to my chest. See the dots? They're stars. I remembered what you said about the stars moving. You said they were different when you met Persephone, and this is how they are now, when you met me. Henry studied the constellations I'd painstakingly arranged on the blanket, and he gently brushed his fingers across the ones I recognized as the Maiden, Virgo, and Core. Thank you. He looked at me with his eyes made of moonlight, and something had changed. The barrier that had been there all this time was gone, and for a moment he almost looked like a different person. For everything, I have never received such a wonderful gift. I raised an eyebrow. I'm not so sure I believe that. You should. He continued to run his hand across the fabric. It has been a very long time since I've received a gift as extraordinary as you. Unable to look away, I stared at him, absorbing every detail of his face. With that barrier gone, it was almost as if I could see who he was underneath, someone kind and lonely and scared, who wanted nothing more than to be loved. Can I try something? I said. If you don't like it, I'll stop. He nodded, and I took a deep breath, trying to keep my stomach from doing somersaults. Gathering what courage I could find, I leaned forward and pressed my lips to his chastely. I'd only ever kissed a few boys in my life, and it felt unfamiliar but not awkward. Nice, I thought. It felt nice. He seemed surprised, but he didn't resist. It was a painful few seconds, but finally he relaxed and kissed me back, his hand cupping my neck. The heat of his skin against mine was almost unbearably hot. I don't know how long it had been before I forced myself to pull away. While I caught my breath, I watched Henry warily, afraid he would bolt. He sat still, his expression blank, and finally I couldn't stay silent any longer. That, I hesitated and offered him a smile. I liked that a lot. After what felt like ages, he returned my smile with a small one of his own, as did I. Nervously, I reached out to thread my fingers with his, looking down at our hands instead of directly at him. Mine was so small that it looked lost in his. Henry, don't take this the wrong way. I could feel intense and immediately felt guilty, though I made an effort to mask it with a teasing look. Let me finish, I said. Don't take this the wrong way, but since it's Christmas and all, would you stay with me tonight? His eyes widened a fraction of an inch, and I quickly shook my head, my cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Not like that. You've got to earn that, and it costs more than just a picture, you know. My weak attempt at a joke managed to break the tension enough to get him to crack an apologetic smile. But could you just stay for tonight? Several seconds passed, and I mentally kicked myself for asking like I was some hormonal teenager who only wanted that. But I didn't want that at all. I wanted his company. He made me happy, and tonight of all nights, I didn't want to be alone. Most of all, I didn't want him to be either. Yes, he said, I will stay. Nothing happened. We spent the rest of the evening talking and watching the lights on the tree. When it was time to go to sleep, I curled up next to him and unashamedly used his chest as a pillow, but that was it. I didn't kiss him again, too content to risk screwing things up. He didn't deserve to be pushed like that, and while taking the next step opened a whole new set of doors, for now I wanted to appreciate his company. We both deserved to enjoy Christmas rather than fumble through a lot of awkward moments. My mother and I walked through Central Park, the haze of the city and the summer bearing down on us. She looked pleased as I recounted what had happened between Henry and me, and she hugged me to her when I told her that I kissed him. That's my girl, she said, sounding happier than she had in ages. We spent our last Christmas together eating ice cream and wandering through the gardens on the hot summer sun, and she pointed out the kinds of flowers that grew wild. She never took her arm from my shoulders, and when I felt myself begin to wake up, I wished her Merry Christmas for the last time. My contentment didn't last for long, however. The first thing I heard when I awoke was the pounding on my door. Confused, I sat up, my hair sticking out every which way, and I ran my fingers through it as Henry stood and walked toward the door. In that moment, I hated him. He looked impeccable, not a hair out of place, and he moved as gracefully as ever. Meanwhile, I'd be paying for sleep, being on the floor for the rest of the day. Yes, he said, opening my door. To my surprise, Ella dashed in, closely followed by Calliope. Ella was crying, her face beat red, and Calliope looked crushed with her slumped shoulders and her face drawn. I want her gone, cried Ella furiously, looking back and forth between Henry and me. Is that a request? Said Henry, moving back toward the nest of pillows and blankets on the floor. Or a demand? She hurt him, said Ella, now focusing on Henry. She hurt him and he tried to find her, and now. Wait, who? I said as I struggled to my feet. What's going on? Ella dissolved into tears. Now standing next to me, Henry looked expectantly at Calliope. She stared at the floor, not meeting his gaze. Ava, she said. She spent the night with Xander, and this morning with Theo found them. They fought, and Henry tensed, and my blood ran cold. And, he said, Xander's passed into the beyond. Chapter 14. Judgment. Ava sat huddled in the corner of her chamber, without so much as a scratch, but on the bed bloody remains were all that was left of Xander's body. A putrid stench filled the room, and I clasped my hand over my nose, but it didn't seem to bother Henry as he examined the corpse. Ella and Calliope didn't come with us, opting to instead stay in a separate wing of the manor with Theo. He was injured, but it wasn't fatal, from what Calliope had described. Seeing him could wait. Apparently, for the people living in Eden Manor, passing into the beyond was the same as death in the outside world. It was as much an ending for them as it was for the living, never getting to see their loved ones again until they passed into the beyond as well. Xander was gone, lost to the underworld, and the only person who could find him now was Henry. I struggled with the knowledge that this wasn't the real end of things, that I could lose Ava all over again, along with everyone I'd befriended since September, and this time they wouldn't reappear. This death was the final step for the people at Eden Manor. This time there would be no in-between for Xander, despite the painful void Xander's loss left in the manor. I took a small amount of comfort from knowing that this place was still part of the world I understood. A knife to the back meant blood, and too much blood meant death. Ava, I said as I approached her. She looked like a frightened animal ready to bolt at the slightest movement. I didn't mean it, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. There were smears of blood underneath her eyes, where she must have wiped her cheeks. I thought he didn't want to see me again, and Xander was right there, and It's all right, I said, although it wasn't anything but. I was queasy and barely able to keep from being sick at the sight of all the carnage, but I turned away from it, focusing on Ava. We should get you cleaned up. I helped her to the bathroom while Henry continued his inspection. Once I was sure she was going to pass out, I found her a robe to wear and busied myself with washing the blood off her skin and out of her hair. We were both quiet. I didn't know how the details, and she was too shaken to say anything, but the time she was dry, I poked my head back in the bedroom, averting my eyes from the horrific scene on the bed. What do you want to do with it? What do you want me to do with her? I said. Henry hadn't moved since I'd left. The guards will escort her to another room, where she will stay until we have decided if she deserves punishment. I paled. Is this another test? He was by my side in an instant, faster than anyone could possibly move. No, he said. Xander has passed. Now come. Ava will be taken care of. Shielding me from having to look at Xander's body, Henry led me toward the door. As we left, a woman dressed in a uniform entered, but I hardly noticed her. Where are we going? I said, breathing in a lungeful of clean air once we reached the hallway. To see Theo. He guided me around the corner, and I followed without protest. My stomach lurched with the thought of what condition Theo might have been in, but I refused to think about it. For all I knew, he was fine. But the moment we stepped into his chamber, it was obvious he was anything but. Ella stood at her brother's bedside, her face drawn and her hands trembling. When Henry and I entered, she glared at me, and I stopped a foot into the doorway. How is he? Said Henry, standing at the end of Theo's bed. He was unconscious. There's a shallow wound in his chest that worries me, but everything else is superficial. He's lost a lot of blood, though, said Ella, her voice rough. Will he wake up soon? There was no compassion or worry in Henry's voice. Instead, it was hollow, and that emptiness scared me more than anything else that morning. Ella shook her head. I don't know. Will he be able to handle the pain if I wake him up? Both of us stared at him. I searched for any trace of the Henry I'd kissed the night before, but he was no longer there. A very large part of me was relieved this cold shell wasn't someone I wanted to fall for, but another part wondered which one was really him. Yes, said Ella, averting her gaze after several seconds. He'll manage. Even I could hear the uncertainty in her voice, but apparently that was all the confirmation Henry needed. He let go of my hand and took a step closer to the bed, towering over it. A moment later, without any pretense or sign that something had changed, Theo groaned. His eyes were so swollen that he could barely crack them open, and he coughed weakly. There was a rattling sound in his chest that made me wince. What happened? Said Henry coldly. Theo struggled to reply, opening and shutting his mouth several times. Ava, she's gone, said Ella in a surprisingly tender voice. You'll never have to see her again. Instead of being comforted by this, Theo's eyes widened, and he struggled to sit up. No, he gasped. Even from across the room I could tell how much pain it caused him. I didn't mean to. She is still there, said Henry, and Ella whirled around, stricken. Xander is gone. Theo slumped back on the bed, his eyes squeezed shut. He attacked me, he mumbled. I came in to wish Ava a Merry Christmas, and I found them together. Xander, he must have forgotten the rules. Thought I was going to fight him. He pulled out his sword and swung at me, and I had to fight back. He was wheezing. Why Henry was putting him through this when he could have easily questioned him once he was feeling better, I didn't know. Better yet, why couldn't Henry heal him like he'd healed me? Somehow I doubted his abilities were limited to ankles. Calm yourself, said Henry, nodding to Ella, who put a cup to Theo's lips. He drank, although most of it splashed on his chest. Ella mopped it up methodically with a towel, as if there were something she was used to doing, though her brow was furrowed deeply. Regardless of how little he'd swallowed, whatever it was worked quickly. A few seconds later, Theo relaxed again. Is that your story, then? That you had no intentions toward Xander and that he was the aggressor? You were merely protecting yourself? And Ava, said Theo, his eyes fluttering shut. I thought he was going after Ava. Henry waited while Theo fell back asleep. Once his breathing had steadied, Henry moved toward me and set his hand on my back, guiding me out of the room. Is he telling the truth? I said. Henry looked at me, his expression still void of any trace of the humanity I'd seen the night before. What do you think? I swallowed, feeling as if I'd suddenly dived headfirst into the middle of a deep lake, the surface nowhere within sight. I think I need to talk to Ava. Henry let me go into the room alone, although he and two guards stood immediately outside the door, undoubtedly able to hear everything we said. I didn't care, though. Getting the truth out of Ava was my top priority, not her privacy. If Theo was being honest, then she hadn't really done anything wrong, had she? But Xander was gone, and that was something that couldn't be ignored. She lay in the middle of a large bed, her knees drawn to her chest. I gingerly sat on the edge of a mattress, reaching out to touch her hand. Are you okay? The answer was obvious, but it was the only thing I could think of to say. No, she said in a choked voice. Xander's dead. He was already dead, I said as gently as I could. He just passed into the next level of things, that's all. Ava was silent. I ran my fingers through her wheat-colored hair, still damp from washing out the blood. Did they hurt you at all? Do you need to see a doctor? No, she mumbled. I'm fine. It was clear that she was anything but. The pain of losing Xander didn't negate the possibility that she had something more to do with it. What happened? She hesitated, and for a second I didn't expect her to say anything. When she did, she spoke so softly that I had to strain to hear her, even though the room was silent. I don't know. I just woke up and Theo was there, staring at me and Xander like, I don't know. I bit my lip. Was Theo the one to attack Xander, or did Xander attack Theo? I don't know. I woke up, saw a sword, screamed, and ran into the corner. I wasn't looking, I just... She rolled over to her back and stared up at me, her eyes red and full of tears. There was blood, and I was screaming, and there was swearing, and I didn't know what happened, all right? I nodded. My fists were clenched, and my nails dug painfully into my palms. Is there anything else you can tell me? Anything else you saw or heard, or... No, she rolled away from me. It doesn't matter anyway, does it? I wasn't sure what happened, but something inside of me must have snapped. I'd spent months, years trying to stop the people I cared about from dying, and Ava couldn't muster up enough compassion about someone she claimed to love to figure out what had happened. I stood quickly, and suddenly the room seemed much smaller than before. Don't you get it? Ava, Xander is dead. Really, truly, never coming back here dead. And right now everything points to Theo murdering him, because he caught you in bed with him. That got her attention. Twisting around, she stared at me, her mouth open. Here's how it goes, I said heartedly. Either Theo is innocent and Xander was the one who attacked him, or Theo is guilty and Xander was defending himself. Do you even care, or are you just upset because you lost a toy? Seething, I began to pace up and down the room. I couldn't remember ever being this angry in my life. I get it, you're dead. Your life is over and you're having fun while you can, but this isn't fun anymore, not for anyone but you. You're playing with these guys like they're only here to entertain you. You act like no one else matters except in relation to you getting what you want, and now Xander is dead because of you. You're blaming me, she said, but I didn't kill him. You didn't hack him into little pieces, but you're the reason it happened. I stopped in front of the bed, running my fingers through my hair. Ella wants you gone, frankly. If all you're going to do is waste your time sleeping with every guy in the manor and acting like the world revolves around you, then so do I. You're useless here. The only things you've done are bicker with Ella and get Xander killed. The moment I said it, I regretted it, but I couldn't take it back. It was the truth, or at least an exaggeration of it, but when I looked at Ava, I saw a scared girl who was my friend, not the heinous, selfish whore I'd painted her as. My stomach twisted, and guilt flooded through me so fast I felt I was choking. Henry let you stay here because we're friends, I managed to say, and while I was calmer, my voice held the chill of accusation. And we are, Ava, or at least I thought we were, but he risked that for me. And all you've done is get one of his men killed, and the other branded a murderer. Do you have any idea how awful that makes me feel? Ava stared at me, her lower lip trembling. You're just jealous, she whispered. You're stuck with Henry your whole life, and I get to be with anyone I want. Admit it. The only reason you're acting like this is because I get a choice and you don't." I glowered at her, trying to ignore the way her words echoed through my mind. Hadn't I been thinking the same thing a few months before? But I wasn't going to give Ava the satisfaction of thinking she was right. She wasn't, not any more. "Don't try to turn this back on me," I said. "I had a choice, and I made it. More importantly, I'm happy with my decision, and I'm doing everything I possibly can to live up to it. I'm not jealous of you, Ava. I'm ashamed." The hurt in her eyes was painful to see, but I forced myself to continue. She had to understand, though there were limits. And until she stopped hurting others, I couldn't stand by and watch any more. "Stay in Eden as long as you want, but don't you dare come near me or Ella or Theo or any other man in this place again. Do you understand? You leave them alone. You leave me alone. I have enough to deal with right now without having to make sure you don't get anyone else killed." I would have buckled if she'd looked at me, so I stormed out of the room past Henry, who wordlessly followed me to my suite. I wanted to slam the door, but he was behind me. Pogo and Cerberus were still curled up together on the floor, and the pillow I kicked missed them by inches. "Now what?" I said, turning on Henry. "Do we sit here and talk about what happened? Are we the judge, the jury? What happens now?" "Nothing," he said, giving Cerberus a scratch behind the ears. "You have already made your decision." I paused. "What?" "Ava will not have any romantic contact with any men, nor will she have any contact with you or Ella," said Henry, and I sat down heavily on the bed. "As for Theo, that is not a judgment I could possibly ask you to make. Not yet." "Why not?" I said, my throat dry with the realization that I wouldn't see Ava again. After everything we'd both been through since September, I felt like I'd failed her. But in a way, hadn't she failed herself? I knew it wasn't her fault, not really. She couldn't have predicted this would happen. She'd still been careless, though, and I stood by and let her. This was on my shoulders too, but no matter who was to blame, Xander was still dead. "Because you did not have the ability to see past a lie." He moved my wardrobe and began to pick through the clothing as if we were talking about the weather or something equally as mundane. I raised my eyebrows. "And you do?" He ignored me. "Nor do you have the power to go into the underworld and question Xander." "Fortunately, that will not be necessary. I already know what happened." I cuddled Pogo to my chest, finding comfort in his warm body. I didn't want to ask, dreading the possibility of Theo's guilt, so I didn't. Henry couldn't search through my closet forever, and he would tell me sooner or later what I wanted to hear it or not. A minute passed, and finally he set a clean pair of jeans and a white sweater on the bed. "Theo is telling the truth, and therefore he will not be prosecuted. Your punishment for Ava is appropriate, and there is no need for me to intervene. I will instruct the others to ensure she follows your restrictions, and that will be the end of it." I nodded numbly. Setting Pogo down, I took my clothes to change behind the screen in the corner. There wasn't anything else to talk about, and the weight of my judgment fell heavily on my shoulders. Had I done the right thing, or had I reacted in anger? And how would Ava, who was already so alone in this house, survive being cut off from me and Theo as well? "I will see you down at breakfast then," said Henry, though the thought of food was enough to make me nauseous. I heard the door open but not close. Still distracted by the thought of what I'd done to my only real friend in Eden Manor, I buttoned my jeans and stepped out from behind the screen, only to see Henry still standing there. His shoulders were weighed down by some invisible load, and he shoved his hands into his pockets, looking similar to how he had in Persephone's room. That a jolt of fear ran through me. But his eyes weren't deadened as they had been so many weeks ago. He was weary, but he hadn't given up again. "What you did today is never easy," he said, "but it was necessary. I cannot imagine how difficult it was for you, especially considering Ava is your friend." "Was my friend," I whispered, but I wasn't sure he heard me. "Do not feel guilty for it. Her actions are not yours. I do not regret inviting her here, knowing she has up until now been good company. Your safety and happiness are what matters most to me." I nodded, and he left, glancing at the reflection he'd given me, which now sat on my nightstand. I felt even guiltier than before. No matter how fault she was, if I couldn't even protect Ava, how was I possibly going to do the same for Henry? Even if this hadn't been a test, I still had several to go. The wrong word, the wrong thought, the wrong action, and this would all be over. Henry's life was no less fragile than Sanders, or even my mother's, and I felt myself start to crack under the burden of fighting for him on my own. Henry stood on the sidelines because I dragged him there, forcing him to pay attention, but I couldn't make him care. I was the only one fighting for him, and I was no longer sure I was up for the challenge. Okay. We've now read up to chapter 15, and I will read more later. Thank you for listening for now. I appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll probably read later on. There are 5 chapters left of the first book.